What's up, everybody? Another week of NLL Weekly here, wherever you get your podcasts: Apple, Spotify, Pandora, Stitcher, Amazon Music, Spreaker. I think I hit them all, Dan, but if you want to put the thing up, again, wherever you get your audio podcasts, you can listen to us there. Podcast Addict and iHeart I Missed. And then, of course, we're streaming live on Thursday mornings, 9:30 a.m. And then, of course, the video is archived on our YouTube channel, NLL Weekly, so make sure you check it out there as well. Chris Schmidbauer, Dan Naraki, thank you so much for spending some time with us. A little bit of a different show tonight. Usually we talk football for the most part, but I'm excited because there is somebody in our area who I've actually wanted to talk to for some time on this show. I've gotten to know her through BCSN coverage, and she is a terrific soccer coach and somebody who I'm really excited to chat with. Before we do that, though, I want to say thank you to our friends over at Car Stereo One. They are our main sponsor here on the show. And, of course, if you're looking to customize window tinting, you're looking to do a new sound system, rims, upholstery, whatever you need, Car Stereo One is there to help you. Parker Lopez and his team have expanded what they do over there at 3120 Central Avenue, so make sure you go check them out. You can, again, go in person, 3120 Central Avenue. Call them 419-474-5553. And then you can do the website carstereo1.com. And when you do, please tell them you heard about him here on NLL Weekly. And we appreciate Parker Lopez and his team over at Car Stereo One for supporting us here on the podcast this year. So without further ado, I want to bring in our guest for this evening. And she is the longtime head coach. I don't want to date you, Lori, but the longtime head coach of the Anthony Wayne girls soccer program. Won a state championship this year. Part of the reason I wanted to have you on, but also because one of the things that I have enjoyed watching, I did not really know much about the sport of soccer prior to joining BCSN. And one of the things I've enjoyed about watching your programs over the years, it feels like you kind of do things the right way year in and year out, and the girls do that. So thank you for doing this. I know you're not always the biggest fan of being on camera and being and talking and all that stuff, but I appreciate you doing it. At least we'll pretend it's because you like me so much.
That's fair. I appreciate you for sure, Chris. Thanks for having me on.
So let's talk about this year to start. A lot of people have kind of felt like this team and this program have been to the dance so many times and have kind of been left standing at the altar on more than one occasion. And I know every year you have been so good about handling those setbacks because you've never been in a situation where you've said, oh gosh, this is the one thing we need to establish ourselves. You've always taken the moments with each team and treated it for what it is and how special each team is. And now that you've done this situation, is there, I would imagine I know the answer, but there's probably no difference in how you feel about this program today than when you did before you won a state championship.
Yeah, obviously the state championship is the ultimate goal, right? We want to win the state championship. That's why we compete. That's why we make the schedule the way we do. That's why we do the team building and all the togetherness, items that we do. The trick for me, though, is if you only look at success as a state championship, you're invalidating all those other years where you don't succeed with that. Each of our teams has been so special for different reasons, and they've been able to accomplish things that maybe before the season weren't necessarily thought to be possible. Each of our girls that have come through our program have brought and kind of raised the bar each year, and this year, winning that state championship, it's a feeling that's unlike anything I've gotten to experience. But in the same breath, what a successful, 23 years with our program that I've been lucky enough to be part of.
Yeah, you mentioned the length of time, but even not just with the actual high school program, but even involved with Anthony Wayne United, which I think that's another piece that a lot of people don't realize. And I didn't know this about you until I kind of started talking with Don Spenoff, a good friend of both of ours, who kind of said, oh, no, you should see all the other stuff that she does in the community. And how important is it to you to be that involved with the youth program? Because so much of what I think a lot of coaches don't understand is that everything does start at that level. And it's not even just about the technical skills and improving all those things, but it's also kind of getting them excited to be an Anthony Wayne general and play in the community and play on campus when the field is able to host games. And then, to be able to represent the community. I think that's another piece where you want to keep those girls in the district as best you can. And you're not always 100% successful, but you've done a really good job because you build a relationship with them, the parents, and they want to come and they want to play for you. So it's kind of twofold that, yes, you kind of get to oversee that skill development, but at the same time, you also get to have this relationship with these girls from when they're young all the way up through their high school years.
Yeah, I don't like to sit still, is the answer to that question. And so I'm involved in the Olympic development program for Ohio. I'm also involved with Anthony Wayne United, for 2 different years. In the past, I've also been associated with the Villa USL team out of the Toledo area. But in terms of Anthony Wayne United, we have Ben Barrett and Bruce Peterson, who are directors of the program, and they do really most of the oversight. My role is really, I just get to coach, which is really nice. Just get to play with the X's and O's and get to spend time with kids. How lucky is that? This year I'm with the 2012 girls, and I'm working with a coach, Rick Bergen, who was a longtime head coach at Sylvania Northview.
Okay.
Was inducted into the Hall of Fame at Northview, and I'm always trying to learn. And so being his assistant allows me to come when I'm available, especially in the fall. In the spring, I take a much more active role, but the fall, it's very difficult, just the logistics of timing and practices and all the things. So it's a really good. Other years, I've been the head coach of different teams, but we're also lucky enough at Anthony United. It's not just Anthony Wayne. It's this year on our 2012 team, we have somebody. We have multiple girls from Perrysburg. We have Springfield. We have St. Ursula. We have a multitude of Rossford. I know I'm forgetting some here, but we have a multitude of kids from different communities that are, choosing Anthony Wayne United to help develop their daughters. I think that's because of the girls, before them and their success, and that they want to be part of Anthony Wayne United, because hopefully they believe that we're going to, regardless of what high school they're going to end up with, we're going to love them hard, and we're going to make sure we push them and do the best we can to develop them as a person and as a player.
I'd imagine you take just as much pride in seeing girls who go to other high schools and succeed there as well, because that even though maybe you didn't benefit the high school level from them, to see them go and be successful, it's almost like a walking billboard to say, as you said, that not only can we develop them as players, but also people, and that's just as important.
Yeah, there's a lot of student athletes who have come through Anthony United, and they chose to go to a different high school, and we support them in that because there's so many different high schools that are great for different reasons, right? I'm a little bit biased. I like Anthony Wayne High School. That's where I spent a lot of my time as a principal at the Anthony Wayne Junior High, assistant principal. But it doesn't matter where they go to high school. We love them and follow them, and keep up with them, and make sure that if they have any questions, we're there to support them in terms of the college and taking it to the next level, or whether it's just seeking advice through high school, making sure that we support them in any way we can. But it makes game days a little bit more fun when you get to play a St. Ursula, and you have a couple of your former athletes on the team. And next year we'll have a couple Perrysburg student athletes who played for us for a couple of years, and it makes it a little bit more fun, a little bit of banter, but all in good fun to support each other.
Let's go back to the beginning when you took over at Anthony Wayne. I'm curious just kind of how you came to the job, and then maybe what the state the program was in, because to be fair, I don't know that everybody knows kind of the ins and outs of and history of programs around here. I mean, I think people look at where the program's at now and are like, wow, that's incredible. But at the same time, I'm sure there's a lot of work and growth and just, I guess, hands in the dirt kind of things going on to make sure the program got there. So how did you get to be where you're at, or how did you join the soccer program as head coach, and then kind of where the program was at when you took over?
Kind of a funny story, actually. I was lucky enough to get a few offers out of high school, or out of college rather. Different teaching opportunities, and one of them was at Anthony Wayne. And I'm a type A personality, so I had all the spreadsheets going and couldn't decide one way or the other. And truth be told, the reason that I'm at Anthony Wayne over other districts is actually because my favorite color is blue. For every positive I had for one district, I had a different positive for another. And so I was like, I'm just going to follow my heart. It's never served me wrong, and so I'm actually at Anthony Wayne because I like blue. And then I'm, again, type A. So I decided that I needed to go to the board meeting to see my name be announced. And the athletic director came up to me and said, you had a pretty successful college career and high school career as a student athlete. Are you interested in coaching? I was like, oh, gosh, no, I just want to be a teacher. I don't know anything about coaching. So Paul Holen kind of coaxed me into considering it. I called him a week later and said, no, thank you. I just really want to work on just being a fourth grade teacher and really do that, do my due diligence with that. And then on August 1st, a gentleman named Steve Besch gave me a call, and he said, hey, just want to let you know, we start practice practice tomorrow. And I said, for what? And he said, you're my varsity assistant on the girls soccer program. I was like, oh no, I actually talked to Mr. Holen and I told him that I didn't want the job. He said, well, you got board approved and you're going to be my assistant. I was like, well, I love soccer, but I actually did track and field in college. So I'd been away from the game for a long time. Soccer was always what I loved. Track, I had a little bit more success in, and it helped me get a great education at Bowling Green State University. So I jumped in. I had an elementary schedule, so I came to practice almost every day late because they get out an hour earlier than we do. I absolutely loved it. Steve moved on after that year. And asked, Mr. Holen, pulled me aside again and said, hey, do you want to be the head coach? And I was like, oh gosh, I have maybe a half a year of experience now. There's no reason that I should be taking a D1 program. I have no business doing this. And at the time, I decided obviously to take the job, and I was the fourth coach in 4 years. Wow. So that senior class had 4 coaches in 4 years, and all of them were successful. Prior to me, it was not something that, it was a unsuccessful program before I got here. The year before I joined campus, we had a student go on to play at the University of Notre Dame, Northwestern, very successful program before I, even took over. So there was many coaches before me that laid the foundation for it to be successful. And Anti-Wayne United is a big piece of that, right? Is having a feeder program that gets girls that are interested and love the game, and then they want to play in the high school level. So that first year I was an assistant mostly when I could make it. And then the next year they offered me the position, and I accepted it. That was 22 years ago. I was kind of joking with our new assistant is Jessica Gass. She was a former Perrysburg All-American, and she said something to me, and I said, well, Jess, I'm really old. And she goes, you're not that old. And I said, if you and Christina DeMarco, our other assistant, if you add your ages together, that's how old I am. And she said, there's no way. And so, how old are you? And she said, well, I'm 22. And then I said, well, how old is Christina? And she said, 25. I said, I'm 47. That adds up. I didn't know it was exactly that, but sure enough. So I've been doing it for a really long time, but each year I'm just so lucky to work with incredible, community members and families and student athletes that, believe in what we're trying to help them become, making sure that we don't, make the path for them, but make sure that they're prepared for that path, whatever that, they choose to make that.
When you talk about that, at least success that the programs had prior to you taking over, did you feel pressure right away? I'm, again, knowing the kind of person you are, I'm sure you put a lot of pressure on yourself, but did you feel like I want to take this and make it even better? Or was there just this, I just hope I know what I'm doing kind of feeling? Because like you said, you only really had about a half a year of experience and hadn't been in soccer day in and day out over your college time.
Yeah, the good news for me was I was so young and naive that I didn't even know what to expect.
Sure.
I was lucky enough to play at a very high level at my high school program. Our freshman year, I was part of the JV program, and we went to the state final. The varsity did, and then my junior year, we went to the state final again. So we played at a pretty high level with my high school from Pennsylvania.
Okay.
And so I soccer was very much what I loved, and I was lucky enough to have some offers out of high school to play collegiately, but I really wanted to go to BG because I knew I wanted to be a teacher, and they were offering for track. And so that's kind of how my path led me to Northwest Ohio. But soccer was something that just from early age, it's actually a really funny story. Students don't necessarily walk around the neighborhoods like they used to when we were younger. I think I'm significantly older than you, but
no, not really. Actually, not really. No.
But I was just wandering around with friends in the neighborhood, and I came back to the house and I said, Mom, I want to go play with soccer with those kids. And my mom said, okay, then go play. And I said, the man said that you need to sign me up. And so my mom said, what man are you talking about? And I think I alerted my mom, and she got nervous. And so she walked my little sister in a wagon up the hill, and she met Mr. Glass. And it was essentially a rec soccer team that was practicing in somebody's backyard. And I wanted to do it. And so I kind of signed myself up, and that was probably 5 or 6 years old. So soccer is something that I've always been drawn to. I was a goalkeeper growing up, and I just feel like there's so many life lessons through soccer. I didn't know it at the time. I just wanted to play with kids because I'm not a person who wants to run just to run. I want to go chase a carrot, aka a ball. And so I did soccer, basketball, and track in high school. And soccer is something that's just always been near and dear to my heart.
It's funny because I think in a lot of ways we kind of mold who we are as adults and things we do after some of the examples that we had set. Is there a coach that you had or somebody that you, and maybe it's a bunch of different coaches, but that you kind of try and model what you do after?
I had so many amazing coaches. I had John Cianello was my first, one of my first, competitive soccer coaches, which was actually one of my best friend's dads. He was the first one that talked to me a little bit about coaching education and going into that because he had done that. I didn't know that at the time when I was younger, but as soon as I started getting into coaching, he was the one that kind of helped guide me that way. In terms of high school coaching, Jay Soroka was the boys coach at the Anthony Wayne when I first took over, and he was absolutely instrumental in helping me with the paperwork, and there's so much that has nothing to do with soccer involved in high school sports. So he was instrumental in helping with that. And then he would, talk me through different X's and O's and things of that nature. Brian Billings has been around since pretty much I started. He wasn't the head coach at the time, but he was somebody that was, instrumental in when I was getting started. His wife actually played for me my first year. She was in that senior class that was, 4 coaches in 4 years. I bring that up every once in a while. And so many coaches in the high school. I had so many amazing coaches that I was lucky enough to get to work alongside and that pushed me as a person without, I grew up in a time when, sometimes coaches could be demeaning and screaming and yelling, and I didn't have any of those coaches. So I would say that I'm not much of a yeller or a screamer. And I would say that kind of emulates many of the coaches that I had. They more, let's have a conversation with you instead of at you. And so I would say that I kind of model a lot of that.
When you start kind of having some of these, you're stringing these years together that at least recent years where you're state final and then state semifinal and all these like back-to-back years where there really hasn't been a season where I would say, even when you would consider maybe a rebuilding year or a down year, where you guys have not still been very competitive and still challenging your team to be better than maybe even what people expect outside of the program. Is that a situation where you've kind of set this bar and we're going to do everything we can to get to that bar? Or at the same time, are you maybe looking at each group individually and saying, well, I think this is the ceiling for this group, or is it, this is the standard, this is what we're going to get to?
Yeah, in our program, our seniors are a huge piece of that. I would say most of the decisions that we make as a program are actually made by our seniors.
Okay.
And so, we meet as I was just talking to a member of our staff tonight, actually, about how, in another few weeks here, we'll meet with the juniors who will be the rising seniors, and we'll start kind of mapping out what the season looks like. They determine how many days a week we go in the summer. They determine the intensity of the summer. They determine whether or not we go to team camp, whether or not we go to events, because it's them that knows, was my body just absolutely exhausted in November, or was I, in a good spot? And so we talk a lot as a group and kind of make those decisions as a group. We also set goals as a group of what do we think that the key performance indicators are going to be for this group. We're not going to ever want to try and be that group, whatever that was. We're going to be our own group. So how can we make our group a success? What does success look like for this group? And then, we just have some really, really unbelievably hardworking kids. And so when you get some athletic, hardworking kids, they're going to be competitive in most matches. We don't do them any favors with the schedule we make.
No.
We have a very difficult schedule. And so we try and challenge them in different ways, playing different formations and playing, different ways in different games so that, if they were to see somebody in the playoffs, I tell the juniors every year that are rising seniors, like, my goal for you is to be 8-8. Going into the postseason, I'd love for you to be 8-8. That to me is a success because we build our schedule to be difficult.
Yeah.
Boy, did this group make me look like an idiot going into the season. But in all seriousness, that to me is, depending on the year, that could be a very successful regular season.
Yeah.
And my hope is to be far better, going into October than you are in August.
That's kind of a radical approach. I don't know. And maybe a lot of coaches do it and we just don't know in the media perspective, but the idea that you have the girls kind of be the ones to decide it. And I also think maybe in a way, and maybe you can say more often than not, it's one way or the other, but do you get a sense too of maybe what a team's goals are coming into it by the way that they make those decisions? Like you say, how hard are we going to go? How many days a week? I think you'll get an indication, I would imagine, of, okay, I know this is a group that is extremely serious about a particular thing. And not to say that other groups aren't serious, but maybe they're not as dedicated. And I know even in the paper, when you were talking about to Michael Burrell about kind of this group, this group was just incredibly driven and focused this year. Is that usually the case, or do you have just varying degrees?
Yeah, it's typically dialed in. It's more often than not that we actually have to, put in a practice where we're doing, lower intensity recovery type things, because the girls want to go 100 miles an hour all the time. They have a really high drive to succeed, whether that be academically, whether that be athletically. These girls are very, very driven. And so a lot of times it's trying to find that happy medium of, okay, but as an adult in the room, I also have to kind of peel you back a little bit to make sure that your legs can get to November, because that's ultimately the goal. And so, I would say more often than not, the girls have a really good heartbeat of, how intense they want to go. And it doesn't make sense for me to beat my drum of doing X if the kids really want to go Y.
Correct.
Right. If the season is, we just want to have fun. That's a very different season than, our goal is to win a state championship. And so we try and match our intensity as a staff to what they want the season to be. But more often than not, they are aligned with what our staff wants, and they want to throttle up.
Again, that's kind of a neat way to do it, though. And I think in a way too, you probably have it where the girls, not that teams don't, but I think the girls are maybe even more bought in, and even the senior class more particularly bought into, all right, we are the ones that set what this is supposed to be. Coach didn't tell us this. The staff didn't decide this. The department didn't tell us what we have to be. We said what we're going to be. So you almost feel like an ownership too, maybe as a senior in that group. And seniors obviously have some natural ownership period, but even more so maybe because we're the ones that put this label on there, and we don't want to be wrong about our assessment of this group.
Yeah, that's a really big piece of it, right? If the students are bought in because it's their team, it's really important for me. This is kind of a very strange fact, but I've never been in a preseason like August 1st photo when we do our yearbook photos, because it's not my team, it's their team. I'm just lucky enough to get to dance on the sidelines, and I try and order really nice gear. And so, I think it's really important for them to take ownership. We actually do a leadership development program most of the winter. We call it a breakfast club. So the rising juniors to be seniors, actually, we read a book study together, and based on what we feel like the needs of that senior class will be, our staff kind of figures out the right leadership book that they might need to be pushed a little bit. Maybe it's a little bit more tactically, maybe it's a little bit more culturally, maybe it's a little bit more of how do I handle social situations. So we try and find a leadership book that matches where we feel like there might need to be a little bit of development. And these kids are unbelievable. They show up at 6:30 in the morning to read a book together, and then we take turns bringing breakfast. The breakfast is really the bait, or the
sure.
the sneak, right? I get frustrated sometimes with coaches when they say we don't have any leaders. To which my question is what did you do to cultivate leadership? And if you haven't done that, then you can't really complain about it. If you didn't have any players and you never spent a minute developing a player, you wouldn't complain that you don't have, high skill players. But we do sometimes as coaches complain about, this student can't lead this way or that way. They're not willing to have a difficult conversation. But if you haven't mimicked what that looks like, how in the world would you expect a 17, 18-year-old to be able to know what that looks like, or what you would expect from that? And so we spend a lot of time in our program going over that and making sure that student athletes understand expectations, but also understand that, with leadership comes a lot of responsibility. And, we expect you to help with rides. We expect you to help with making sure the freshmen feel comfortable. And that's, I think, a huge piece of our culture is that, while it's the seniors who we're doing a lot of it with, they should be getting feedback from the younger students. They should be getting, what is the collective feedback from the rest of the group.
I imagine then that a line that I know I've heard, I'm sure you've heard it from other coaches, but this one probably drives you nuts, is, well, this is just a bad senior class. This is not a great senior class for that. And to your point, I think there is sometimes maybe where they don't put the effort in, and it's not easy. I'm sure there are days where you walk out of meetings and just kind of shake your head and you want to kind of go quit or hide in a closet for a few days. But I think that's the piece, is if you're not teaching, and ultimately that's kind of what you got into this, even though that's the other thing. I think a lot of coaches understand this, but the general public doesn't understand this sometimes, is that this is an extension of the classroom in a way. I mean, you are essentially doing a teaching job just of a different subject essentially. And it's about life lessons and all the things that you'd probably be talking about in a classroom setting. You're just doing it outside on a grass field instead of being in front of a chalkboard doing it.
Yeah, without a question. I think that, I started as a fourth grade teacher at Monclova and then moved to a seventh and eighth grade math teacher, then kind of moved into a dean of students role and now into an assistant principal. But all of it is just helping students learn to become better versions of themselves through leadership, right? Everybody has their why. My why is to hopefully teach students that they have limitless potential, and it's based on their leadership and their willingness to accept feedback. And I just think it very passionately for kids that want to grow. If you put yourself around the right people, including your peers, the sky's the limit.
I love just kind of the way that your team carries itself though too, because you can't ever really tell. I would say, at least maybe the casual observer can't tell whether your team thinks they're having a good season or a bad season. And maybe that's the point, is that they approach each game the exact same way. I don't think anybody gets super high or super low, even in the most intense moments. And I remember even talking with Katie Carr after the win over, I'm forgetting the team that you played at
Anderson.
Anderson. Yeah. Thank you. She had said, we were talking about the fact that Perrysburg's start was delayed because the Upper Arlington team had a bus situation. And she said, oh, well, we had a bus breakdown last year. And then I had talked to you earlier that night and you said, well, actually, we had some bus issues tonight as well. This group just doesn't seem, at least this group this year, but I imagine most years, they just don't seem to get fazed by a lot of stuff. And I think that's kind of comes with that leadership piece and all the different things you guys try and instill in them. The attitude is always the same. The approach is always the same. It's never we're really good, and so we don't have to try as hard, or man, we really stink right now and we're not very good. They're always kind of even keeled, and you really wouldn't know that they were even playing for a state semifinal and a chance to go to the state championship last week before the game, because they just really approach it all in the same way.
Yeah. So our state semifinal, to your point, is we had, I think, 15 different first responders there who were getting ready to take us out of town, police, fire, sheriff, all of it. And I'm talking to the charter bus company and they said, hey, the hydraulic system's not working. I said, what do you mean it's not working? Like we have to have a bus. And their response was, well, we'll send a 28 person bus. I said, great, we have 34. Are the rest of the people walking? What's the plan?
Yeah.
Meanwhile, I didn't really let on to the kids right away that we might not have a bus and that we might be walking to Wapakoneta. And so I pulled Dr. Pfefferly, which is our assistant superintendent, aside and said, hey, you got to get us a bus, see what you can do with transportation department. He immediately called our transportation director and they started taking care of that. And then we kind of delayed the students to see while we could figure out what exactly that looks like. So we took pictures with the first responders, and our Anthony United students had made cards for all the girls. And so we handed those out that we were going to do on the bus, but who cares? Let's do it before the bus. Yeah. And then I pulled the captains aside and I said, all season we've talked about controlling the controllables. There's some things that we can't control and there's some things that we can. And how you respond to them is truly, a testament to your capability of, in your resolve of being a team first player and a leader. And I said, we don't have a bus, but we're getting a school bus, even though we rented a charter bus.
Yeah.
So we're going to arrive in very different style. And they send the bus and, we board it. And right before we board it, all the three captains just pulled the kids aside and said, guys, we get to, have a dance party on a school bus for one more time that they kind of thought was done. Right. So it's all in how you spin it. And the kids did a phenomenal job of saying like, yeah, of course we wanted a charter bus. That's part of the reasons of going to state is you get these extra things, right? A charter bus versus a school bus. It's a little bit, comfier ride and all the things that come with it. But they turned it and I was, I kind of got a little teary eyed, like standing off to the side, just the amount of pride that I had for the kids and how they delivered that message, because that's not what the kids were expecting. That's not what the kids wanted. But they were like, hey, we get to have another bus ride together. And how cool of an opportunity is this? And then they boarded the bus and then did really well, especially in that first half against Anderson, and then had to defend a little bit more than I would have liked.
Yeah.
But, I genuinely believe that anything, because of some of those, lessons that we were working on, and quite frankly, just because of the way the students were able to receive them, a lot of those like hiccups, it could be, catastrophic for some teams, really solidified us, and actually kind of brought us a little bit closer together, in my opinion.
How do you keep kids interested all the way through? I know that with the success that you guys have at the club level and all these different things, it's probably easy, especially in today's society. We want to play now. We want to start. We think we're really good. And sometimes the patience that a kid, and unfortunately, sometimes the patience that parents have isn't maybe in a lot of bountiful situations. And I think when you look at that time for young kids, you can be very easily influenced by the flashy playing time or whatever the case may be. So how do you keep a kid that might be, I don't even want to say on the fence, but might be thinking, I'm not getting the playing time that I think I should get, or I'm not on varsity and I'm on JV instead? How do you keep those kids bought into what you're trying to do?
I think that's all you can do is tell them the truth, right? And I might be wrong as a coach and as a staff. We talk a lot. Our JV coaches are paramount to what we do. We believe in what they teach and how they push the student athletes. There are many years, I would say most years, where our JV program would compete against many varsity levels, and wherever possible, we try to have our JV kids play varsity kids, because that's going to make them better, right? Katie Carr is a perfect example. She was a JVB kid as a freshman. She had no business being there, but our team was that good, and we had that many depth of goalkeepers, that's where we knew she could get a lot of minutes. As a sophomore, she got some varsity time, and as a junior, she split time with Addie Beal. That's not easy because both Beal and Katie Carr deserve to be full-time starters.
Sure.
And once we went to playoffs, we went with a senior. So Addie Beal ended up getting, the nod late in the season. So Katie Carr is coming into her senior year, first team all-league goalkeeper, phenomenal goalkeeper. I think one of the best we've ever had. And she didn't really play until her senior year. But that's all we can really do is be honest with them and tell them, like, this is a depth issue. This isn't a you issue. These are the areas that we would love to see you kind of polish up. These are the things that we see as your strengths. And, if the time comes where you leapfrog somebody, just know that you're going to be given a chance. Hopefully our track record has shown that we've given young kids a chance if they have, proven themselves, worthy better than the person at that position. And we don't get it right all the time, quite frankly, as coaches. I think that that's important to own up as well. I remember a postseason conference with one of the current seniors when she was a sophomore, and she said, "Coach, like, I've been playing, about half the game my sophomore year, but I didn't play at all this postseason." And that person that did play kind of had given up the game costing goal, or the goal that swung the game. And I said, I don't know, maybe I got it wrong. Obviously, like, we gave up that goal. Maybe if you were there, I can't answer that question. But I just can tell you that I'm imperfect and that I'm going to do everything I can to love and support you. And when I get it wrong, just know that I'm going to own it and say that, hey, that one's on me, or that's on our staff, because, we missed that one. But I think it's really important to just have honest conversations. And one of the things that's really important in our program is we can't be afraid of hard conversations. And I think the more you have hard conversations, the more comfortable people are with you, because they know that, hey, I don't have to agree with you, but I at least see your viewpoint on things.
Well, like you said, too, being honest doesn't just mean being honest about where a player is, but to your point, also being honest in moments of where I might have made a mistake, or holding myself accountable as well. And I think that probably, even though you probably don't look at it this way, that I'm sure goes a long way with kids as well, of saying, listen, Coach Williams is willing to also admit when she's made a mistake, versus just always on the players. It's always on the players. No, we make mistakes too. And I'm not afraid to call myself out in front of you guys as well.
Yeah, I think that's super important, just interpersonally, right? That had nothing to do with soccer. I think it's important to know that we're flawed humans, and we're all trying to get better. And, if I'm the same as I was yesterday, then I'm not getting better. So, somebody was giving me a hard time because on Sunday I was at a coaching class. They're like, "What are you doing at the coaching class?" And I was like, I had a chance to get better, and why wouldn't I take it? And so I just think that it's really important to, constantly push myself and get advanced degrees and get, different experiences, life experiences, and coaching certificates, and collect as much knowledge as I can, so that I could hopefully pass that on to some of the student athletes and coaches I get to work with.
I know that you've kind of been somebody who's kind of grown in leadership within the state of Ohio as well. Not that that's something that you focus on because it's a you thing, but why is it important to you to kind of be involved in some of those state level organizations to make sure that the game is steered in the right direction.
Yeah, what a huge year we have coming up, right? We have a men's World Cup that will be here this summer, and then the women's World Cup will be, right on the heels afterwards, and then we have another, youth CONCACAF, and we have a big 3 years coming up. So when the chance to serve on the Ohio Soccer Association board of directors came up, I didn't think I had any more time, but as I mentioned before, I don't like to sit still. And so it's a unique opportunity, and it gets me to know people from all around the state. And I think that's really good for networking and for helping our student athletes, because everybody knows that somebody in the coaching world. If I can meet one person that might help somebody get a college offer or something like that, I think it's my job to try and get myself out there as much as possible to be an advocate for my students. In terms of, Northwest Ohio Soccer Association, being on the board of directors there, I think it's really important to make sure that some of the younger coaches, who might not have been as lucky as me, have the support of, hey, how do I fill out this paperwork? How do I, not mess this up? Or, as a first year coach, to be able to call somebody and say, hey, I have this parent, I have this student athlete, I don't know how to work through this situation. I think it's really important to have those people that, love them or hate them. I've had a lot of years of experience. And so, again, they don't have to take my word for it, but I can tell them like what I've seen in the past, and then they can kind of make a judgment based on, what works in their situation. But I think it's really important just to be an advocate for fellow coaches and for other student athletes. One of my favorite parts about being, one of the reps for, the high school coaches is I get to talk about not just even my student athletes, but I get to talk about all the Northwest Ohio student athletes. Yeah. I get to then talk at the regional level about Ohio athletes. And, anytime I get to brag about, the product that we have here in Ohio, I try and do that.
When you think about this year and where this team ended up and where it started, was there a moment or a thing? And obviously you don't know for sure, but was there one thing or one trait, one moment about this group that you said they might have it, this might be the year? Obviously every year you hope it's the year, but is there something about this group that maybe stood out to you that maybe this is the group that was going to get it done?
Yeah, the rational person in me says that, from those early leadership meetings, the irrational person is we got new quarter zips, and we had worn as coaching staff a black quarter zip the whole season. And then we got new quarter zips, and I changed it to the new one. And then that's a game that we felt like we did not play our best. And so then we obviously never wore that quarter zip again at a game day. So, I'd like to give a lot of credit to the kids, but I really think it was the superstition wearing the quarter zip that we did. No, in all seriousness, I think that this group of seniors, they wanted it immensely. They were a fiercely competitive group of 7 girls who they want to do everything they could to help their young student athletes, because they knew that it wasn't going to be 7's not enough, right?
Yeah.
And the way that they brought in some of the younger talent was really, really unique to watch, because they were the freshmen 4 years ago that ruffled some feathers because a lot of them played early varsity minutes. And then we had a freshman class this year that did the same. And so they kind of had been there and known what worked, what didn't, what leadership helped them, what leadership didn't help them. And so I think that they very much kind of were empowered by their roles and to watch. We have a lot of student athletes on an amended day. And Lila Simon and several of the other girls would go and pick up the freshmen to bring them to practice, because we don't practice on campus. We practice a quarter of a mile away, but so that they didn't have to walk. And she wasn't even at school. She would go back to school to pick those kids up. And those little things, like, you think is not a big deal, but those freshmen knew that, this kid who's going out of her way to make sure that I have a ride to school so that my parents don't have to be inconvenienced to get me to practice. And, those little things add up, and Briley Schermerhorn was doing the exact same thing. And I just think we had some kids that got it. They knew that it was bigger than them, and they knew that it wasn't going to be just them. It had to be more than them. And they got this team to follow them wherever they wanted. Most of the time it was the 7 Brew in Perrysburg, but they liked their coffee. But they wanted to go wherever the seniors were going, because they just had so much respect and admiration for that group.
You mentioned Lila, and one of the things that stood out to me as soon as I watched, unfortunately, the first game I got to do for you guys was when you played St. Ursula, but the thing that immediately stood out to me about her was her ability to create out of a lot of different areas and to create her own shot. And I know that a lot of people will take for granted. I know you know this better than anybody, that you cannot take a person who can create their own shot for granted, because it is such a hard skill to learn. And Lila is one of those freshmen, as you said a few years ago, that was kind of bursting onto the scene and learning on the fly. And then to see her this year do some of the things that she was able to do, to take and hit some of the angles that she was able to hit. The creativity to me is what stood out most about her offensive game, is that she was just able to do a lot of different things and could never, I don't think you could ever get a beat. Like, she didn't have one move that she went to. I mean, some girls, run a straight line and they're just going to beat you down the field, or, a lot of teams will try and dump it over the top. But Lila was so difficult because she could hurt you in so many different ways. With her creativity, how much did that change how you guys attack teams? Because you could use her on so many different spots on the field.
Yeah, we actually had to be careful at times. We talked to the team of, Lila can't score all the goals for us because, if you're able to quadruple team her, then all of a sudden, we're gonna struggle with where we're going to be able to get to. And so we actually talked a little bit about, as a team, of we've got to create things from other directions because she is so creative and so special. We've had a lot of really, really good finishers in Anthony Wayne history. She is now number one in the number of goals in a season. She passed somebody, Abby Allen and Kate Allen, who went on to play at Indiana and Northwestern. So very special, talented kids. But you're exactly right, is that she left foot, right foot, back to goal, at an angle, with pace. She's not rocket fast, but she's really, really quick.
Mm-hmm.
And she gets her shot off and it's a rocket very quickly. But that's not because of just all unnatural talent. This is a relentless worker. She's working with a trainer, getting stronger. She's working with, doctors, making sure that she stays healthy. She's working with, mom and dad, of making sure that she's getting everything she needs, nutrition wise, and making sure that she's also, staying, in the books. And she is, quite frankly, fiercely competitive. So a lot of that was just her guts and will. She just refused to anything but success, especially this season. And that was there the last 3 seasons, but not like it was this season. I would say that, the senior class, like I said before, is all of them are very, very competitive. I actually had a high school teacher tell me this week, she goes, I have to tell you a story. Is I had one of the student athletes in class and I said to her, hey, good luck at the state championship. Like, I know it's going to go well. She goes, I know. And it wasn't out of arrogance at all. It was just like absolutely dialed in. And the teacher was taken back of like, wow, like I didn't even have to watch the game. I knew what the result was going to be because you could just see it in her eyes. Like, she was just fire in her eyes. She was ready to go. And I know that maybe she says that and we lose and it's a different story. Right. But that teacher pulled me aside and made sure that I heard it, because she was like blown away with the confidence that she had to say that, but it wasn't arrogance. That's truly what she believed.
I look at this group too, and I was reading that you had said the one thing that stood out to you a lot about this group too is how much they liked being around each other. And I think that's kind of a neat piece, because you guys spend a lot of time together, and it's all sports, but I mean, you better like who you're going to be around, because starting in, well, July, I'd imagine, or June for you guys, but I mean, you're spending a lot of time together, and in a way, there's a sisterhood that kind of comes out of this, that whether you like it or not, you're going to be kind of together for 5-6 months. And if you're not ready for that, then it's going to be a really long 5 or 6 months for you. But you had said in the paper that the one thing that stood out to you was these girls didn't want to leave each other. And that's not to say other ones didn't like each other, but I think to have this group of, like you saying, we're sitting there going, all right, you guys need to go home, versus them kind of trying to get out of the team meals fast enough, or the group outings fast enough. You guys are the ones saying, listen, we need, it's this time. We need to let so-and-so's parents clean up and all that kind of stuff. That's kind of that speaks to also maybe a closeness that you have to have if you're going to ascend the mountain that they ascended this year.
Well, and I think that goes back to those rides, right? Like you're getting a ride, you're a freshman, the senior's willing to give you a ride, to XYZ. And it's all those little things that build into that. Again, those things don't happen overnight, right? It's very intentional, and it's very specific of how the seniors chose to schedule things. They had multiple sleepovers at somebody's house. And the one time they are all staying in one person's bedroom. There was like 30 of them. I don't know how big this bedroom was, but I don't think it was that big. But they literally just absolutely love spending time. And don't get me wrong, there was, some people who were best friends with other people,
Sure.
but they just genuinely loved being around. And it wasn't one of those things where it was adversarial ever. Of course we had kids that were on the bench that wanted more minutes, but they also knew that the kids that were getting the minutes were getting it done. And so my job is to be a practice player, and I want a bigger role, and I'm training as if I'm going to get a bigger role. But how humble of a teammate is that to just know, like, hey, it's not my time right now. One of those players I think is Ellie Shirolis of she wanted more minutes. She wanted more minutes, and she just relentlessly worked. And so because of that, all of a sudden she got a few more minutes and scored a few more goals and got more minutes, and it compounds. Her and Kelsey Borchard, very similar. Maybe they didn't start every game, but they were critical for our season this year. And all the student athletes that got even fewer minutes than those two, they were just absolutely focused and dialed in and doing everything they could for our team. And in my opinion, those are the hardest roles, right? You don't want to be the backup goalkeeper. You never want to be the third center back because you don't ever sub center backs. But our kids, like, the positivity and the togetherness was truly something special, with wanting to spend time together, with the sleepovers and the team dinners. And, we'd be at team dinners, and all of a sudden I look over and people are jumping in the pool. I was like, guys, you need swimsuits. What are you doing? But they're just enjoying each other. And, it was just a fun atmosphere to be around. And they just wanted to be around each other 24/7, which was really awesome.
And you mentioned that depth too. I think that's the other piece where maybe people don't understand the stats maybe don't show up in the way that they make an impact, but the fact that you can get Lila, or you can get, Lydia Smucker, or some different players a chance to get a few moments on the sideline to recover, to catch their breath. There are probably seasons where you're in a playoff chase like that and you're on the fence of, do I sub out at this point? Because the drop off from player A to player B is pretty significant at this point. So to be able to have that ability to keep those players who maybe were the stat stuffers, if you will, to keep them fresh and be able to not have a drop off or as much of a drop off, that's important, because you can feel free to, I don't feel in a moment where I can't sub Lila off. And I'll use as the example that the game against Anderson, I noticed several times where Lila was on the sideline and was catching a break, and you had different players up top and doing some different stuff. And to have that ability and that freedom to have that chance to say, we can put these different girls out there and I don't have to stick with the person who would be considered the leader or the stat stuffer, is a huge advantage, to be able just to keep legs fresh, especially knowing the length that you have to play and the amount of months that you have to play. And like you said, to keep legs fresh.
Yeah. And that's twofold. That's a little bit too. Not only does that allow Lila to get a break, but it also gets a younger kid experience.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, Katie Carr, even though this is her first year as a starting varsity goalkeeper, she's playing half minutes as a junior, right? And so getting different minutes for Molly McVicker and Tegan Hennessy and some of those young kids that were able to sub in for Lila, it's a trust, right? We've got to trust that you're going to do what the game plan is. And if you execute that, then you're, again, going to continue to add more minutes. So it's twofold. It gives some of those other, starters, minutes, but also gets those game changers, which is what we call our substitutes. It gives them experience and a big pressure matches, right? I joked with the one mom after the Anderson game. I said, "Did you have a mild heart attack when I put your daughter in?" She goes, "I cannot even tell you." So she was really nervous. She hadn't played in the game prior, but we felt like what we needed her to do is hold up play, and that particular player was very talented at holding up play. And so we threw her in and gave her a few minutes, and then, we're able to sub Lila in once she was able to get a quick rest. And so I think it's twofold, right? Making sure that you're getting experience for younger kids, but it's also giving some of the starters, a little bit of a sip and rest.
When we talk about that state championship game a couple weeks back, the one piece too that I liked that you had said was the fact that you guys go down early and didn't phase the girls at all. And you also mentioned about Lila not being the only person who can score, and for Lydia to have the hat trick in that game and get all 3 goals. And you can argue about being in the right place at the right time, whatever it was. She was still able to, on the biggest stage, somebody else was able to step up. And so much of these postseason runs, and again, it sounds pretty basic to say, but you always need somebody who maybe isn't, and not that Lydia didn't time and time again this year, but you need somebody else sometimes to take on a different role or do something maybe a little bit above what they've normally done to be able to win some of these games. And maybe in the biggest game of the year, that was proven of Lila didn't score, but we had somebody else step up and put all 3 goals in for us and be able to come away with a state championship. It doesn't happen if somebody else doesn't look at the situation and say, all right, I'm going to make something happen here.
Yeah, well, I think twofold. Lila did score in the state championship; it just didn't count.
Fair enough. Fair
enough. But in all seriousness, Lydia had an unbelievable assist to Lila in that Anderson game to get us in the state semifinal to get to the state final. But Lydia coming in, and she had a couple injuries, in her younger years, but she had 3 goals total coming into this season. This year, Chris, she scored 20.
Yeah.
So, that 3 goals in the state championship, I wasn't surprised at all because she has a knack of knowing where to be because she reads the game so well, right? The right place at the right time is a figure of speech, certainly, but her tactical awareness is through the roof. And so I think it's really important to note that, like, I wasn't surprised at all that it was Lydia, but if it would have been a couple other people on the team, I also wouldn't have been surprised, with, Ellie getting the game winner in the regional, final. And, I think none of that necessarily surprised me. Even it's Lila, it doesn't surprise me, but there's talent on that roster, and we were very lucky to have players who just, had that killer instinct of wanting to do whatever I can for the team. So Lydia's year kind of was encapsulated in that final because we, like everybody else, got to see what Lydia already had put in for us that season. But maybe people didn't notice that. Maybe it wasn't on Hudson's scouting report, but it didn't surprise our staff at all.
Yeah. When you see the clock hit 0 in that game and you know that you've won this state title, describe the emotion, just because I know you have been on that doorstep on a few occasions. And again, you're pretty even keeled. You don't usually get too bent out of shape if that doesn't go your way, because you know that it's not easy to do that. But when it finally you're able to accomplish that, what's that emotion like, knowing that you've kind of finally been able to get to that mountaintop?
I'm probably gonna get emotional right now. 2 things came kind of to my heart. First, my dad passed away this past June. So the first thing was thanks, because I'm sure God's ear was a little bit numb from my dad making sure that he was in it.
We get it. She'll win a state title.
So I think that's the first thing, is that I just know that he had a place in it somehow, some way. And so that was the first thought I had, is just thanks, Dad. I appreciate it. And my mom was able to be there from Pennsylvania with my sister, which was really special. And so that was my first thought, is, man, how lucky am I?
Yeah.
And then the second thing was, honestly, seeing the kids. Like, I've had a chance to win a state championship in high school in track and field. I played in one. We got second place in soccer. But to see the just unbridled joy in the kids' faces. We've got to work on our dog piling because we all like collapsed over. But just I can't even put into words like the pride that I had, and I've had so much pride for all the alumni before them. But to get to see like how much extra they put into the season and how much they just put into each other to get to this point in the season, and then like to see their dreams become a reality was truly like, it's indescribable. Like I still get chills watching them run into each other and then run over each other. And like all the pictures, and I just was just so thankful. And I took a second to kind of look into the crowd. And our community is a very special place. Don't get me wrong. I knew that before last week. But to see how many videos after the fact of like watch parties of, second graders, and, Waterville Primary had it in their gym broadcasting in the high school for the students that went to the school, had it in the auditorium, and, they had 3 spirit buses that came to support the kids. And, we had aunts and uncles flying in from Florida to come watch, their family play in this game. It's just, that's what makes high school soccer so special, or high school sports special. Club serves so many purposes, and it's such a great environment for competitiveness and, skill development. And, honestly, that's where majority of our kids get, scholarship offers, is through the club game. But that's just not able to be replicated in club that I've ever seen. And to see the kids, like, just sell out for their community. We have generals on the back of our jerseys, and literally they did so well to make Anthony Wayne proud. All the kiosks now around town say congratulations, state champions. And we spend time making sure that the students know that, because it's really important for them to feel it. And the kids were, sharing about how little kids were asking for autographs, during the season, and hopefully, inspiring that next generation to want to be in the position that they're in. It was a really long answer to tell you pride is something to say, I guess. But the first thought was of my dad. And so thankful that my mom and sister were able to be there with my nephew. And then the second thing was just getting to see it through their eyes was just different than winning it as a kid. It's just different.
When you mentioned that community support too, the state certainly didn't make it easy to do that, because with the expanded divisions, your state championship game was on a Friday at noon, which, as we know, people who work, unfortunately, not a lot of places are out of work at noon, unfortunately, but to have that ability to have people want to come, to take time off of work, to rearrange plans, because again, you don't know that you're going to play in a state championship until Wednesday night of that week. And, that's a situation where when you're getting ready for a state title game, that's the piece that the girls want parents to be able to be there, and aunts and uncles, you said grandma and grandpa. That's a hard thing to do. So for people to rearrange their schedule and to put the miles on the car and all that different stuff, that's where I'm sure that helps, knowing that no matter what the situation is, the community is going to be behind you guys, because of the fact that they're so proud of the job that you guys do and proud of the girls.
Yeah, it's truly remarkable. We win on Tuesday night, and we can't do anything until Wednesday morning, because none of the hotels are out of that. We went down in 19. We went down the morning of, but we didn't play till 7:00.
Yeah.
And to my earlier point of we pulled the seniors aside and said, do you want to go early? Because it's not super early. Columbus isn't far.
No.
Do you want to go Friday morning, or do you want to go Thursday night? And Thursday night, what do you mean? Why would we go Friday morning? We get to spend more time together if we go Thursday night. And I was like, well, guys, there's logistics of getting a bus and hotels and practice field. And it is a legitimate logistical nightmare.
Yeah.
I don't know how, I physically don't know how we get this done in 48 hours. And they're like, well, coach, we'll do whatever you can make it happen, but we ideally would really like to go on Thursday. And Tiffany Tully, our athletic secretary, was absolutely paramount in getting all that done. I'm talking to the restaurant while she's talking to the hotel, and then we're just trying to go through it together to try and get everything logistics wise planned, and then trying to keep the parents in the loop so that if they wanted to go the night before versus it was a lot of moving parts. But everybody just did whatever they could to make it happen so that this weekend could be even the most special it could possibly be for these girls, and the parents and athletic administration, and it was just absolutely phenomenal.
Well, I could talk to you all night, just because I do enjoy talking to you, and I know not to before a game, but outside of that, I know that, and I do appreciate this. I'll let you go. I really do. I want to have you on because I think, again, the way that you carry the program, and I know that you say it's the players, and I don't disagree with that, but I also think that it takes someone who is bought in to the community, to the girls, and wants what's best for them. And that's the one thing that has always stood out to me in all the years that I haven't covered you for that long, but for the 6 years that I have, every time I've had one of your games, that stands out to me, is that you care about the girls, you care about the program, and you care about the kids first and foremost. And I wanted to have a chance to speak with you about that, because I do think, it's great that you won a state championship, but in a lot of ways, I think and not to get sappy, but you've been a state championship coach for a while. And I don't think that people see that all the time. And so I wanted to make sure that you got your flowers as well, because I think it's worthwhile. And I think what you do is really neat to see, and to see people kind of do things the right way. Doesn't always maybe get highlighted the way that it should. So thank you for joining me. Again, I know this isn't your favorite thing, but I appreciate the time.
Well, absolutely. I kind of conclude with this. On our freshman meeting, we always promise the freshman parents two things. You won't always agree with what we say. I promise you that will be the case. And the second one is that no staff will ever love your kids more than our staff.
Absolutely.
Does. And that's as people, not as soccer players. And so if we can end a season with the second one being ringing true and the parents feeling that, I feel like that's a success, right? So state championship is really nice, and man, I wouldn't mind more of those. But
Sure.
in the same breath, we have such amazing kids that made that happen, and our staff did everything we could to support them. But it was truly the 29 girls that we took down there that made that happen.
Well, I appreciate the time. I'm sure I'll see you at a basketball gym or something this off season. But I do appreciate it. Thanks so much, Lori.
Absolutely. Thanks, Chris.
That was Lori Williams, the head girls soccer coach for Anthony Wayne, a state championship this year. But as I said, one of those people that as you get a chance to be around and cover her teams and see the way that she carries herself on the pitch and how she deals with stuff, just really an incredible person. And Dan, I know you are somewhat of a closet soccer junkie to a degree. I certainly have seen you with Premier League games on and all that stuff, but so much of what she does and how she carries her program is just the right way. And that's something that you and I have gotten a chance with a lot of different coaches in the league have seen. Northern Lakes League is really lucky to have some of the caliber of people that we have coaching the different teams and different programs.
And I think that's exactly what you just highlighted, is when you have great people put in these positions and they're able to do things the right way, you get great results. That's exactly what they're seeing.
Well, unfortunately, on the other side of things, on a different kind of football, the season for our NLL teams is done. Whitmer was the last team that was standing in the Northern Lakes League. You and I got to be there on Friday in Lakewood. I don't know that anybody was entirely thrilled by what they saw, but a couple things stood out to me about that game between Whitmer and St. Ed's. First and foremost, St. Ed's is really good, and we knew that going into it, and maybe even better than we knew going into it, how good they were. That's a team that if they don't win the region, I'll be surprised. They just seem to have dominated everybody so far. Now, to be fair, Menor is going to be a heck of a challenge on Friday, but with that all said, this is a St. Ed's team that is built to win. The Brandon White, the tailback, really impressed with their quarterback, Johnny Evanchik, who faster than you would have thought and just a really good athlete. Receiver-wise, they had some big guys, and then defensively, they're a hard-hitting group, and I don't know that Whitmer was ready for the physicality that St. Ed's brought to the field that night. But the other thing that stood out to me, too, is I'll let you make your point. Go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to agree, and I think that is the biggest thing. The first thing I noticed on the sideline on those first couple of possessions is that the size was what we expected, and they were going to be bigger. And that defensive line, as you guys mentioned, had kid is 295 and kid is 270, and I don't think any team in the Northern Lakes League has seen that size on a regular basis.
No.
But like you said, the physicality, I think, was something that kind of took probably everybody on that sideline aback at first. Not that they weren't expecting it, but it's a different thing to go, hey, they're going to hit us harder. Then it's a different thing to go out there and get hit.
You saw that immediately too, because even on that opening kickoff, the return man, because Whitmer squibbed the opening kickoff, and the return guy for St. Ed's absolutely laid a hit on, I don't remember who it was that tackled the guy, but ended up that it was a solid collision. I mean, this was not some kind of, I'll get hit and go down. I mean, this guy ran through the defender, and it just so happened he got tripped up. But I mean, the physicality was what jumped out to me. But the one thing that you and I were talking about beforehand is there are some real questions in Division I. And I know we've seen in the other sports, the state has tried to figure out a way to make things a little bit more competitively balanced, is probably the best way to put it. And you've added divisions in different sports. You've had teams kind of fluctuate so that more teams have a realistic opportunity of winning a state championship. And in the Division II, I don't know that it's as lopsided, but it certainly can be. But in Division I, I definitely think it is lopsided in certain regions, and in more often than not, probably in favor of the private schools as well. And I'm not a big private versus public. I think sometimes there's something to be said for beating a private school, and there's definitely some pride that comes with having that opportunity and knowing that when you accomplish that feat, there's a lot of, I think, just accolades that you get. However, when you look at the size, the pool of talent that St. Ed's is able to pull from, Ignatius is able to pull from, and I know people are probably snickering at the Ignatius comment because they weren't or haven't been very good. But for the most part, these private schools have been able to pull from a bigger pool of talent. And I know Whitmer has open enrollment, but you're talking about geographically not having the same maybe resources as far as population's concerned. But all of that to say, when you look at the ability for our Division I teams, and we'll throw Findlay, Whitmer, Perrysburg out there, in your opinion, from what you've seen, and I can give my thoughts after, but in your opinion, from what you've seen the last few years, and we've been doing this now together for 3 years, does it appear to you that it is likely anytime soon that you would see a team that's from Division I from Northwest Ohio genuinely or honestly have a realistic chance of winning a state championship? And I know it's a loaded question.
Yeah. Well, if you don't want to come out completely pessimistic, so I will say that if there's one thing that I learned from the great Kevin Garnett, it is that anything is possible.
Sure.
The problem, I think, is, and it's unfortunately realistic, is everything you highlighted. There is a resource gap between Northwest and Northeast Ohio, and a lot of it has to do with population. When you have a bigger pool of talent to pull from, you are able to grab a higher grade of talent, and not just, oh, they've got 5 kids who are going to go on next year and they're playing FBS football. That's part of it, sure.
Yeah.
But it's the fact that you have 5 guys who are going to go play for FBS teams. And I'm sure if we look down the roster and we're, evaluating player by player, they've probably got another handful of guys who could walk onto an FCS team and grab snaps. And you have a handful of guys behind them who are starters at any D2 school across the country. And when you can pull that depth of talent, and I think that's what it is. That's not to say, and again, that is not to be completely pessimistic for Northwest Ohio, is that there aren't talented kids born and bred around the Toledo area. There are, and there are a ton of them, and they've been successful, a ton that have been successful at this level and the next levels. But it's a volume game, I think, and it's going to take a very special group to kind of break through that barrier.
And this is that one sport to me that when you are trying to win a state championship at the football level versus basketball, or again, soccer is probably the closest thing to American football, I would say, in needing depth. But basketball, hockey, yeah, you need big players and you need guys who can skate fast, but your depth there is 5 guys on hockey. Your depth is a goalie 6, but your depth in basketball is 5 guys. Your depth in some of these other sports, track and field, you're not talking about there's equalizers in some of these sports because you don't need the level of depth that you need at the high school level. And as you said, and this is the one piece that gets lost in the shuffle, is that you're only as good as the next guy in line. And that's the hard part. So for example, and I will say Whitmer was relatively healthy, so I don't want to sit there and blame injuries in this instance, but there are years for teams around here where a year does get derailed because the guy who is the starting tailback is really good and his backup is okay, but there's a huge gap between first team and second team. Whereas when you watched St. Ed's on Friday, Brandon White is really good, but Tyrese Buchanan, who was the backup, who was also a senior, was probably 2 or 3 inches taller than Brandon White was and probably weighed 25, 30 pounds more and was just as much of a difficulty to bring down as Brandon White was. And I look at the quarterback situation where literally it looked like they had the exact same type of kid playing quarterback, and there wasn't much of a drop off in that position either. So there's just so many different situations where I look at the depth piece and know that if you are not able to have that that small drop off, that small decrease, that's where it makes it really difficult to be a state championship caliber team, in particular in Division One. Now, that's not to say at other levels you don't need that, because you do, but the size of the kid in Division 5 or the size of the kid in Division 4 a little different than the size of the kid that's coming out of Cleveland or is coming out of Columbus or Cincinnati or whatever the case may be. I mean, you're talking about major metropolitan areas that have a huge amount of people that are living there. I know you joke about radio market size, and I know just for two radio nerds, it's funny, but Columbus, Cleveland, and Cincinnati, I'd imagine, are all top 25 population markets in the country for radio. Toledo is like 105th, and that tells you size of population and importance of population is so much less. And that's really where I look at Whitmer and Perrysburg and Findlay, and the state. And there's never going to be a perfect system. I get that, but the state really should look at what's the reality of a team from Northwest Ohio really being competitive. And to be fair to a place like Canton McKinley or Massillon, Washington, those are the exceptions. Those are not the norms. And so to have programs that have the ability that those programs do and can attract the talent that they attract, that's, people move from out of state sometimes to come and play for McKinley or Massillon, Washington. No offense to Whitmer, Perrysburg, or Findlay, but more often than not, you're not having people move from Florida to come play high school football for your program. And that's the honest truth. And so as this evolves and as we see the competitive balance be more and more something the state wants to lean into, I do feel that they need to assess what makes sense. And again, I don't like getting into the whole private versus public. I don't want to separate those two out because I don't think that's the answer either. But there has to be some kind of way to say, and maybe it's less in Division One. I don't know. I mean, there's no perfect system, and I'm sure there are a lot of places who are saying, well, we don't want them in ours because that's unfair that a Whitmer would get to play in Division Two or whatever the case may be. But I just look at how realistic it is to be in those tournaments, and right now, a ceiling for a Northwest Ohio Division One team really does feel like it's until you run into one of those programs.
Yeah.
And that's, I'd even talked with a good friend of mine who was a coach on the 2012 team for Whitmer that went to the state championship game. And he had said that he thinks just as much a part of their success was the issue that they didn't have to face St. Ed's and St. Ignatius on their route. They were able to dodge those teams with the way that the bracket ended up settling. And to have somebody say, and that was a really great Whitmer team. And that was a team that refused to lose. And it's why they got to the state championship game. But at the same time, for him to acknowledge that we were lucky with our tournament draw, that also kind of speaks volumes about where even some of the most seasoned guys who have been a part of programs that have been super successful to say, listen, we were lucky that we didn't have to face one of those two teams. So,
yeah, it's a tough element to it too, to look at that. And I mean, to basically admit that at some point, yeah, we're all just kind of waiting to see who's the first in line to get blown out of the water by the bigger guy. And
yeah.
it sucks to have to admit that. Sometimes that's the truth.
Yeah, and I think that's the hard part. And you want to be able to have kids feel that they are in the mix and that they are a legitimate, or there's just as much of a chance for them to do this as anybody else. But I don't know that you can, the rules are not equal for everybody. I mean, you even go to pro sports and someone will say, well, yeah, it's not fair for, it's not realistic that the, Cleveland Guardians, who you and I are a fan of, can compete for a World Series because the Dodgers and the Yankees and the Mets spend all this money. And it's like, no, you're right. And that's why there's always this constant call for there to be a salary cap, and that to make it more even so that more teams do have a chance. It's why the NFL has a salary cap. It's why the NBA has sort of a salary cap. It's why the NHL has such a strict salary cap. Part of it is finances, but it's also to make sure that you do have governors in place to make sure that one team can't just outspend everybody. And I think that's kind of where we're at with some of these bigger programs that are private institutions, but also even a McKinley or a Massillon, that what's the reality of being in there? And to be fair, I think Whitmer does have a better chance against a McKinley or a Massillon Washington, but it's hard to look at when you've got a team that has so many kids on the roster that you can do double numbers at the high school level, which I don't think I've seen in a long time, maybe ever. It does speak to the resources that are available for those programs versus the resources that might be available to a team out of Northwest Ohio. And again, I wonder moving forward what the real takeaway is going to be at some point of, can we get to a point where everybody feels like they've got a legitimate chance to win a state title? And I don't know that that's the case. And I look even at like a Central Catholic who has been very successful in Division III, but not to take anything away from their run, because they've been successful and have had to do so, and they've had to navigate a lot of the same difficulties that certain teams have to navigate. But the runs have started in divisions where I would say the playing field is a little more level than what it is at the Division I side. And that's where it becomes hard to overlook that aspect of this.
I mean, it's a reason you can look down, and in Division 5, the regional final is going to be the 5 seed and then the 9 seed.
Yeah.
These things are a little more wide open. Excuse me, Division 6. Sorry.
But you're right.
But yeah, it seems like, things are there's a little bit more parity the farther down you go. And it's unfortunate that I think Division 1 is always going to be that level. I don't know how you're ever going to actually be able to balance it. There's no other way around it.
And that's fair. Maybe there isn't. And that's where, maybe it's a pipe dream that at some point you can get there. And you're right. Maybe it never happens. And I don't know that it will.
Unless they're willing to expand Division 2 and make Division 1 a super conference, essentially. And that's a whole nother discussion. And that's got a whole lot of other financials attached to it, which is above and beyond my pay grade.
Let's, before we wrap up, to kind of reflect. We reflected on a lot of other team seasons. You and I got a chance to have a first front row seat for what Whitmer did this year. And I'm curious, in your mind over the last 3 years, what you think this team's legacy is moving forward, because I have my opinions. Like I said, I'll let you go first, but this is a team that did more than people thought they were going to do. So where do you think overall people should rank this or kind of classify this season as?
I think you probably hit the nail on the head right there, is that this is a team that was able to overachieve. And it's also a team that had built a very solid foundation for the next several seasons with a highly talented upperclassmen group. And it's something that actually stuck with me. And I'm not confident, but I'm hope that it came through a little bit in the post-game interview with Coach Justin Keller. And it's something that he said when I asked him about the senior class. And he said, I didn't have to get them to buy into anything. And that was something I was worried about, being the new. I mean, yes, they knew him as he was on staff when they were freshmen and sophomores, but to go in and having played 3 years under Coach Winters and done things a certain way, and then to have to turn around and completely upend that and get to know a new style and possibly a brand new playbook, et cetera, et cetera. But he said that senior class accepted him and worked with the rest of the team so that we all got on the same page so fast. And that might be something else to remember, just literally how quickly this team came together in the locker room and on the sidelines to support each other. And I could tell you a great story from Friday night about that quickly, but also to accept this new coaching staff and let them put them in the best positions possible. And I hope that's what a lot of people will see come out of this, is that it was, like I said, it was a team that gelled so quickly with all the upheaval they could have possibly done. You know how, the challenges of being a first-year coach at any level, especially high school, and trying to get 14, 15, 16-year-olds to completely change their system in a matter of months. And, they got back, they supported it, the coaching staff supported them, and they were able to overachieve with that.
I look at that piece of it, and the one thing that will stand out to me is guys who, and I don't even think it's just from a leadership standpoint, but took ownership. And that was something that, from the outside looking in, when you consider the amount of talent that was lost, I mean, you think about, and I said this last week to Justin when we had him on, was there were people who openly said around that team, and I'm not mentioning names, but said, this is the worst Whitmer O-line that I've seen in the preseason that I've ever seen. And if I had told you at the end of the year, you would have 3 backs who had over 500 yards rushing, and those 3 guys would have combined for like almost 2,000 yards, or maybe a little over 2,000 yards rushing for the year, you would have said, no way, not a chance. Actually, it's 2,100 yards, doing the quick math, over 2,100 yards. I mean, the idea that, yes, you had 3 really good tailbacks, but that still doesn't happen if you don't have at least a capable offensive line. And to see the growth of that group in particular, but defensively, there wasn't anybody on that defense. And I said this to Coach Keller last week. There wasn't a name on there that jumped out. There was nobody. I mean, you think about the names that were covered this year in Northwest Ohio for football. I never heard LJ Glover, who ended up being the NLL Player of the Year in the Buckeye division. I never heard Dominic Arndt, who had 6 interceptions, and I bet is probably one of the highest totals anybody had around Toledo this year. I never heard about Zach Aubrey a lot. I know we talked about Zach Aubrey a lot, but there wasn't a lot around how good Zach Aubrey was. And that's not to say that the media didn't do a good job of covering it. There are a lot of really good talents, but it just points out the fact that you had a lot of guys who did not get recognition from this team that in any other year would have gotten recognition. And I think back to last year, Napoleon Jemison was covered incessantly last year. You had him in particular, Carter Lowe, and rightly so, was covered incessantly last year. But in many ways, I would say that what this team achieved this year versus what the team achieved last year was above what the team last year achieved. And that's not to put down what the 2024 team did, because I thought they played their tails off and there were really, again, 2 games that stand out as problems, but overall, the expectations coming in this year versus what the expectations were coming into last year, it really tells you how that senior group in particular, but I think a lot of guys on that team took over. And I'm excited to see what happens, because I keep hearing about how good this soon to be sophomore class is. And there are a lot of people who have said to me, if you think that the group was good this year, wait till you see what the sophomores look like. And we'll obviously have to bide our time and see how everything shakes out. But man, when you hear phrases like that, that's exciting to hear. So I mean, and I talk about Perrysburg coming back next year with literally everybody. I mean, there isn't anybody outside of maybe like 2 players that started that aren't back next year for Perrysburg. And Anthony Wayne, you got another year with Porter and seeing what he can do in the off season. And we waxed poetic about the competitiveness of Northview and where they're going to be at, and see what that improvement looks like. And clearly Clay has shown that they can pull off some big wins, and Napoleon and the Cardinal. And again, I go through and adding Liberty Benton, who we talked about. What does that look like moving forward? Clearly they found what it's like to play Liberty Center, as a lot of teams have, but Liberty Benton is going to come in next year, and they're going to, I think, turn some heads with how good they are. I'm excited to see how it is, but to have what had happened last Friday happen was kind of a bummer. But at the same time, can we as an area, as a league, and I say this as we as a collective, obviously, but can we get to a point where we can be more in sync or on par with the bigger programs around the state? And that's a tall order, and maybe that's a pipe dream, but I would be curious to see where this can go and what this group of coaches can do, because it would be nice to see, and I don't even necessarily expect state champions, but to see at least a team that competes for one. And it would be great to have Dirk Connor or Justin Keller or Andy Brungard or Derek Pennington or any of these coaches, Tyler Swery, any of these guys be able to sit on this show, much like we just had Lori Williams do, and talk about what it was like to win a state title or compete for a state title. And again, I don't know that any of us have gone into the postseason with a feeling that, man, they've got a real legit shot to win a state title. There's a lot of, well, if things go right, and that's not usually a great segue to building confidence, that you feel really good about a team's chances. And that's something I'd like to see. But again, great season. It was fun. I'm excited to see what we have in 2026. And before you know it, we'll be starting that piece up. And I'm excited about where all of these teams land and the off-season progress. And again, can't wait to see what that is. But congratulations to all the teams. I think everyone had some value and brought a lot to the table this year. And maybe wins and losses weren't always there. But again, I use Northview as the poster child of, yeah, but the final score doesn't tell the full story of what that game was like. And there was a level of competitiveness this year where teams are starting to push their level of play to match the big boys of Anthony Wayne, Whitmer, Perrysburg, Findlay. And you're starting to see some of these programs really try and get to the same ability level, skill level, and competitiveness level. Not always going to be perfect, but the fact that teams are trying is a nice sign and should be something that all of the coaches and athletic directors and all honesty, Richard Brown should be really proud of, that these teams are all trying to get to a point where they're not just doormats of this league. And that's not always the case. I mean, you and I have seen plenty of professional college where programs just wave the white flag and say, we're never going to be that, and we're not going to really try. And it does take people to understand that it's not going to be an easy road, but maybe we can get there. So on that note, we will sign off for the night. We're going to try and do some special stuff between now and the holidays. We'll be off next week for Thanksgiving, so we won't have a show next week, but we're going to try and do some different stuff. One of the things that I had talked about last year, we weren't able to get it together, but we're going to try doing it a little bit earlier, maybe see if we can get on the radar a little earlier, is kind of do some classic NLL guests, guys who have either been players or coaches, who have been real talents that have made a mark on the fields, the basketball courts, the fields and diamonds, whatever the case may be, or were coaches of those groups that really made an impact and changed programs and history at those programs. And so the goal is to try and do that. We're efforting a couple different people. So certainly stay tuned to that. But this was kind of a fun one because, like I said, we didn't have necessarily a game plan coming into out of last week of what we were going to do if Whitmer lost. And it kind of appealed to me, or kind of jumped up out of nowhere of like, oh, we should do this because this person won a state title and we should recognize that. So really excited that we were able to have Lori Williams on, and also talk another sport, because I don't know that we always get a chance to do that. So thank you to her for joining us. Thanks to the folks at Car Stereo One. We appreciate them. Always Parker Lopez and his team. We appreciate you guys. Thank you for being the sole sponsor of NLL Weekly. And we thank you for listening. So again, whether you spent some time with us, all of the episodes, wherever, we appreciate you listening, watching, whatever the case may be. Of course, all the shows are archived on our YouTube channel, NLL Weekly. If you want to listen to the audio version of it, Spotify, iHeart, Apple, Pandora, Stitcher, Amazon Music, Spreaker, Podcast Addict. That's where you can get it, download. Again, please like and subscribe to the shows, rate the shows. That's going to help us as well draw more attention with the algorithms and people attracted to the channel. It'll be recommended to more people. And that's the stuff that if we want to keep growing this, we certainly need that. So please, again, do those kinds of things. It certainly helps us out and helps the channels out as well. So we appreciate you. For Dan Naraki, Chris Bidbauer, thank you for listening to NLL Weekly. We will see you. Keep up to date on our Facebook page. That's what shows are coming up. We'll be at. So, and keep posted that Facebook page. And that's also NLL Weekly on Facebook. We will see you in a few weeks. Goodbye, everybody.